Bonsoir. The first thing Miss Honoria Vale heard at Barrow-mere Park was not the bell, nor the wheels of the hired carriage grinding to a halt upon the pale gravel, nor the solemn voice of the butler announcing her arrival as though she were a parcel delivered at an inconvenient hour. It was a man saying she would fail. The words came from beyond the half-open door of the great entrance hall, spoken low enough to be considered private and clear enough to be unforgettable. She won't last a week. Honoria stood with one gloved hand resting on the brass handle of her small travelling trunk, and for one sharp breath, the vast house seemed to listen with her. Barrow-mere Park rose around her in disciplined splendour, all polished black and white marble, high windows, dark portraits, and a staircase that divided halfway up as if rank itself required two directions. Servants moved with the quiet precision of people trained never to reveal surprise. Somewhere deeper in the house, a clock struck 3. Honoria did not look toward the voice at once. She lowered her gaze to her right hand, where the doeskin glove had split along the seam between thumb and palm. She had mended it twice in the coaching inn with thread nearly the wrong shade, but the journey from Bath had worried the old leather thin. She folded that hand beneath her cloak before anyone could notice. A woman with only one good pair of gloves learned early that dignity depended upon angles. The butler, Mr. Cresswell, glanced toward the open door with a flicker of discomfort. "Miss Vale, if you will be so good as to wait here, I shall inform Lady Maud that you have arrived." His tone was faultless. It contained neither welcome nor insult, which was perhaps the finest courtesy a poor gentlewoman could expect in a ducal house preparing for an engagement. "Thank you, Mr. Cresswell," Honoria said. Her voice did not shake. That was something. Behind the door, another voice, older and feminine, answered with dry amusement. "Alastair, you have not even seen her face." "I have seen enough," the man replied. "One trunk, a winter cloak in April, and a pair of boots that have known more roads than ballrooms. My aunt has acquired another wounded bird." Honoria looked down at her boots. They had been polished until the cracked leather gave back a tired shine. Her father, when he was alive, had said one should never apologize for clean poverty. Yet there were houses in England where poverty entered before the person did, where every repaired hem and modest ribbon stepped through the door first and gave evidence against its owner. Barrow-mere Park was such a house. She could feel it measuring her. "A wounded bird may still have claws," Lady Maud said. "Not claws sufficient for this week," the man answered. "Lady Seraphina will smile her to pieces before Thursday." At the name, a murmur moved among the footmen near the far archway. Lady Seraphina Lorne, daughter of the Earl of Davonwick, was evidently a person whose smile carried consequence. Honoria knew the type from smaller rooms and poorer tea tables. Beauty sharpened by expectation. Politeness used as a hairpin. A woman praised for grace because others bled quietly around her. "Then we must hope Miss Vale has the good sense to disappoint you," Lady Maud said. A pause followed. Honoria pictured the speaker turning, perhaps toward the hall, perhaps toward the future she had arranged without consulting the Duke who owned it. Then Mr. Cresswell stepped through the doorway and cleared his throat. "Miss Vale has arrived, Your Grace." Silence fell at once. Not loud silence. Not theatrical silence. The colder kind. Honoria lifted her chin and looked into the room. The Duke of Calder-mere stood near the hearth with his back partly to the fire, tall, dark-coated, and severe in the way of men whose names had opened doors for generations before they were born. He was not old. That surprised her. She had expected the dry arrogance of age, but Alastair Wren was in the hard prime of life, with controlled shoulders, a clean-cut face, and eyes the grey of rain on slate. His expression did not change when he saw her. That also told her something. A kinder man might have looked guilty. A crueler one might have looked amused. The Duke looked as if he were revising an estimate and disliked the need. Beside him stood Lady Maud Fenwick, his aunt, silver-haired and narrow-eyed, with a cane in one hand and enough authority in the tilt of her head to make the butler seem like a schoolboy. "Miss Vale," she said, advancing. "You are punctual. That is a rare virtue in a world increasingly devoted to entrances." "Lady Maud." Honoria curtsied. Not deeply enough to make herself a servant. Not shallowly enough to presume equality. Her mother had taught her that balance before teaching her French. "I hope the journey was not too uncomfortable." only long enough to make a rival welcome. Lady Maud's mouth twitched. A diplomatic answer. I was told you possessed discipline. The Duke spoke before Honoria could reply. Were you also told she possessed experience in a house like this? His tone was not raised, yet it travelled through the hall with the ease of rank. Honoria felt several servants grow still behind her. No one possesses experience in a house like this until such a house has finished with them, Lady Maud said. That is why I prefer intelligence. Intelligence will not keep her from becoming a subject of amusement. His eyes rested on Honoria then, direct and cool. This week will not be gentle. Honoria should have lowered her gaze. A woman in her position survived by yielding small things quickly. Yet something in the phrase made her tired beyond caution. This week will not be gentle. As though gentleness had been promised to her anywhere else. As though rented rooms, unpaid bills, morning gowns turned twice, and letters begging for respectable employment had been soft tutors. She met his eyes for exactly the length propriety allowed. Then I am fortunate, Your Grace, that I was not recommended to Lady Maud for my delicacy. Lady Maud gave a small sound that might have been approval. The Duke went still. Not offended, perhaps. Worse. Interested. It lasted only a second. Then his face closed again. You understand why you are here. Lady Maud's letter said she required a companion for the duration of the house party. A temporary arrangement, he said. 1 week. Yes, Your Grace. And after that? After that, I shall go where I am sent, provided I can do so honourably. That answer changed the air more than she intended. Lady Maud's gaze sharpened. The Duke looked at her torn cloak, then at the small trunk beside her, then at the hand she kept hidden beneath the fold of wool. Honoria knew he had seen the movement. Observant men were dangerous. Observant powerful men were worse. Before he could ask, footsteps sounded from the upper landing. A young woman descended the staircase with the unhurried confidence of someone accustomed to being watched. Lady Seraphina wore pale blue silk that caught the afternoon light and softened it, as if even the windows understood their duty. Her golden hair was arranged in perfect loops beneath a pearl comb. Her smile arrived before the rest of her did. It was lovely. It was also exact. Aunt Maud, you have found her at last, Seraphina said, though her gaze went first to the trunk, then to Honoria's boots, then to the hidden glove. Miss Vale, is it? How brave of you to come all this way alone. How kind of you to call it bravery, Honoria said. Most people call it necessity. Seraphina's smile flickered, almost invisibly. The Duke noticed. Honoria saw him notice, and for reasons she did not welcome, her pulse changed. Lady Maud tapped her cane once against the marble. Miss Vale will rest before tea. Cresswell, have her trunk taken to the east corridor. A footman stepped forward. Honoria tightened her hold on the handle before releasing it. The trunk contained very little, but little could still be all. As the footman lifted it, Seraphina tilted her head. The east corridor? Is that not rather near the servants' stair? It is near me, Lady Maud said. That is the only geography that matters. Again, the brief silence. Again, the sense of invisible lines being drawn. Honoria understood then that Barrow-mere Park was not merely a house preparing for an engagement. It was a battlefield arranged with flowers, silver, and correct forms of address. She had not been invited as decoration. She had been placed. By whom, and for what purpose, she did not yet know. The Duke looked at his aunt. You are determined, then. At my age, determination is one of the few pleasures no one can take from me. And when Miss Vale asks to leave before the week ends? Lady Maud turned to Honoria, but the question had already found its mark. So had the insult. So had the challenge beneath it. Honoria felt the torn seam of her glove press against her palm. She thought of her father's empty study, of the last coal scuttle she had counted before leaving Bath, of the landlord's wife pretending not to pity her, of every room where she had been tolerated because she was useful and dismissed because she was poor. Then she curtsied once more, not to the Duke alone, but to the house that had begun by doubting her. If I leave early, Your Grace, it will not be because I failed to last. The Duke's eyes narrowed a fraction. Lady Seraphina smiled as though she had just been handed an entertaining toy. Lady Maud looked deeply pleased. Mr. Cresswell opened the way toward the east corridor, and Honoria followed him across the marble with her torn glove hidden and her spine straight. Behind her, she heard Seraphina's voice, soft enough to be mistaken for sweetness. Poor thing. A week is generous. Honoria did not turn. She had learned long ago that some cruelties grew larger when fed with attention. Yet as she passed beneath the first portrait of a dead Calder-mere duchess, she made herself one quiet promise. She would last the week. Not for Lady Maud, who had summoned her for reasons still concealed. Not for the Duke, whose judgment had arrived before his courtesy. Not even to spite Lady Seraphina, though Honoria admitted that would provide a certain private satisfaction. She would last because she was tired of being measured by what she lacked. At the end of the corridor, Mr. Cresswell paused before a narrow but clean chamber overlooking the kitchen garden. "Your room, Miss Vale." "Thank you." When he left, Honoria closed the door and stood alone at last. Only then did she remove the glove. The seam had split wider, showing the pale skin beneath. She laid it on the small writing table and smoothed it with 2 fingers. A foolish thing to keep. A necessary thing to mend. Outside, carriage wheels sounded again on the drive, bringing more guests, more witnesses, more danger dressed in silk. Honoria drew a needle from her workbag and threaded it carefully. The week had begun. By breakfast the next morning, Honoria understood that Barrow-mere Park did not wake. It arranged itself. Fires were stirred before dawn, silver was warmed until it caught the pale April light, and footmen moved through corridors with trays balanced so perfectly that not a spoon trembled. From her narrow room near the east corridor, she heard the house breathing through walls and bells. 1 ring for the housekeeper. 2 for the dressing rooms. 3 from somewhere deep in the family wing, where people of consequence required hot water before they remembered the names of those who carried it. Honoria dressed carefully. Her grey gown had been brushed the night before until the nap of the fabric nearly shone. The hem was old, but it was clean. Her collar was plain, but it was white. She had stitched the torn doeskin glove by candlelight until her eyes ached, yet the seam still showed when she flexed her thumb. She put the gloves on anyway. A poor gentlewoman did not always repair a thing until it looked new. Often, she repaired it until it could survive being seen. Lady Maud's maid arrived at 8:30 with a message that Miss Vale was expected in the breakfast room. Expected. Not invited. Honoria heard the distinction and went. The breakfast room faced the eastern lawn, where mist clung low over clipped grass and the black branches of chestnut trees. The sideboard glittered with covered dishes. At the long table sat Lady Maud, the Duke of Calder-mere, Lady Seraphina Lorne, and a heavy-shouldered gentleman Honoria had not yet met. His waistcoat strained faintly at the buttons, and his smile carried the confidence of a man who had spent his life assuming others would make space for him. "Miss Vale," Lady Maud said. "Come in before the eggs lose heart." Honoria curtsied to the room. The Duke looked up from a folded letter. His morning coat was dark blue, severe and perfectly cut. There was no surprise in his gaze this time, only attention. That was worse in a different way. Lady Seraphina turned with a sweetness so polished it might have reflected candlelight. "Miss Vale, how fresh you look after such a journey. Plainness becomes you. It suggests sincerity." The Earl of Davonwick chuckled into his coffee. Honoria crossed to the chair indicated by the second footman. It stood halfway down the table, neither among the family nor among the servants, which was to say exactly nowhere. "How fortunate," Honoria said, taking her seat. "Sincerity is less expensive than lace." Lady Maud coughed once into her napkin. The Duke's eyes lowered to his plate, but not before Honoria saw the faintest change at the corner of his mouth. Lady Seraphina's smile remained. Only her fingers tightened around the handle of her teacup. "Papa," she said lightly, "you have not greeted Miss Vale. She is Aunt Maud's newest experiment." "Ah." The Earl of Davonwick turned his pale eyes upon Honoria as if deciding the value of a horse from a distance. "The companion." "Temporary companion," Lady Maud said. "There is nothing temporary about usefulness," the Earl replied. "A quality more families ought to cultivate in young women without fortune." Honoria accepted a piece of toast from the footman and thanked him. She felt the Duke watching the movement, perhaps because she did not rush, perhaps because she did not shrink. "My father believed usefulness was a Christian virtue," she said. "He did not consider it a substitute for courtesy." Silence landed softly. A knife touched porcelain somewhere near the head of the table. The Earl's face reddened by one shade, but Seraphina leaned forward as if delighted. "Your father was in the church, was he not? How instructive. I have always admired clergymen's daughters. They are taught to be grateful for the smallest comforts." "We were taught to notice them," Honoria said. "Gratitude is different from hunger." The Duke set down his letter. "Indeed. One word. Quiet." It altered the balance of the room enough for Seraphina to glance at him. The Earl gave a short laugh. "Calder-mere, you are generous to indulge philosophy at breakfast. In my house, dependents eat where they are placed and thank Providence for the chair." Honoria felt the sentence aim at her like a well-thrown stone. The chair beneath her seemed suddenly visible to everyone, its position a map of her worth. Not guest. Not servant. Not equal. Useful, if silent. Tolerated, if humble. She folded her napkin across her lap and lifted her eyes to the Earl. Then Providence must be greatly occupied arranging furniture. Lady Maud made no attempt to hide her amusement this time. Seraphina's cup clicked against its saucer. "Miss Vale," she said, still smiling, "you must forgive Papa. He speaks plainly." "Plain speech is a mercy when it is honest," Honoria said. "When it is merely unkind, it is only laziness dressed as courage." The Earl pushed back slightly from the table. Before he could answer, the Duke spoke. "Miss Vale is here at Lady Maud's invitation." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "She will be treated as a gentlewoman in this house." The footman behind Honoria became very still. Lady Seraphina's lashes lowered. The Earl looked at the Duke with the annoyed surprise of a man who had expected agreement from rank and found judgment instead. "Of course," he said. No offense was intended. The commonest lie in England, Honoria thought, and perhaps the most useful. She did not thank the Duke across the table. Gratitude, given too quickly in public, could become a second humiliation. Instead, she inclined her head toward Lady Maud and reached for the marmalade as though her pulse had not climbed. The Duke saw that too. His gaze remained on her for one moment longer than comfort allowed. Breakfast resumed, but it did not recover. Seraphina spoke of the guests expected that afternoon, of the engagement dinner, of flowers for the drawing room, of whether blue or ivory ribbons would better suit the announcement. Each topic was harmless. Each word was placed to remind Honoria that some women were born to be arranged with flowers and others were expected to carry the scissors. After the meal, Lady Maud led Honoria to a small morning room lined with correspondence boxes. "You write a clear hand, I am told. Clear enough to be read by people who regret asking for honesty. Excellent. I have invitations to answer and a nephew who mistakes suspicion for judgment. Sit there." Honoria sat at the writing table. For the next hour, she copied replies, sorted cards, and learned the geography of power through paper. Marchionesses wrote in slanted ink. Widows used black-bordered cards like small declarations of endurance. Young ladies sent perfumed notes. Mothers wrote as if every sentence carried a daughter's future. Lady Maud worked beside the fire, occasionally making a remark sharp enough to cut ribbon. Near 11, Seraphina entered without knocking, carrying a small ivory correspondence book. "Aunt Maud, forgive me. I thought you might wish to add Lady Rothbury to the Thursday list." Her eyes moved to Honoria's pen. "How industrious. Miss Vale, would you be so kind as to take this to the silver tray in the hall? It is just there." Honoria looked at the book in Seraphina's hand. A card protruded slightly from between its pages, almost hidden by the blue silk ribbon used as a marker. The visible edge bore a printed name, E. Mr. Edwin Pike. Beneath it, in smaller lettering, Chancery Lane. Seraphina noticed Honoria noticing. The smile came back. "On second thought, perhaps I shall take it myself." She drew the book closer, but Lady Maud's cane touched the floor once. "Leave it." Seraphina paused. "Aunt, if Lady Rothbury is to be added, Miss Vale will copy the direction." That is why she is here. The book passed to Honoria. It was warm from Seraphina's hand. Honoria opened it to the marked page and saw the calling card fully now. Mr. Edwin Pike, Solicitor, Chancery Lane. On the back, in a cramped feminine hand, someone had written, before announcement. No delay. Honoria felt the room narrow around the little card. Seraphina stood very still. Lady Maud's gaze had not moved from the fire, but Honoria knew she had missed nothing. Is there a difficulty? Seraphina asked. Only with the ink, Honoria replied, sliding the card back exactly where she had found it. It has smudged slightly. How troublesome. Most hidden things are when handled too often. Seraphina's eyes hardened so quickly that the beauty nearly vanished. Then the door opened. The Duke stood there, one hand on the brass knob. He looked first at his aunt, then at Seraphina, then at Honoria's right hand resting on the correspondence book. The repaired seam of her glove had split again, the pale thread exposed like a confession. His gaze fixed on it. Miss Vale, he said quietly, was that done here? Honoria looked at the Duke's eyes before she looked at her hand, because she had learned that people often revealed more in the instant after a question than in the question itself. His gaze was fixed on the broken seam of her glove, not with mockery, but with a concentration that made the small tear feel suddenly dangerous. Lady Seraphina stood beside the writing table, one hand still resting on the ivory correspondence book as if she might reclaim it by force of grace alone. Lady Maud sat by the fire, utterly still. The morning room had been full of paper and ordinary duties a moment before. Now it held its breath. Was what done here, Your Grace? Honoria asked. The Duke came farther into the room. Your glove. It was old before I came. That is not what I asked. His voice remained quiet. It was the kind of quiet that turned evasion into evidence. Honoria folded her right hand over her left, covering the tear. It split this morning. On what? A woman with one pair of gloves does not always know which small insult finally ruins the seam. Lady Maud's cane struck the carpet once, not sharply, but with meaning. Seraphina laughed softly. How poetic. Miss Vale makes even mending sound tragic. Only to those who have never needed to mend anything, Honoria said. The words were out before caution could stop them. The Duke's expression changed by the smallest degree. Seraphina's did not. That was how Honoria knew the remark had landed. Alastair, Lady Maud said, if you have come to inspect household linen, you are too late. Miss Vale has already found 3 errors in Lady Rothbury's direction and 1 in your steward's spelling. I came to speak with you about Thursday, he said, but his eyes remained on Honoria. Then you may wait until Miss Vale has finished copying these notes. Seraphina's smile returned with a new brightness. Aunt Maud, surely Miss Vale should not be kept indoors all morning. The hothouse camellias are at their best, and Mrs. Bell told me you wanted fresh blossoms for the blue drawing room. Perhaps Miss Vale would enjoy the errand. It is only across the East Walk. The request sounded harmless. That was its first warning. Lady Maud looked up. Mrs. Bell did not tell you that. She told me. Did she? Seraphina touched her throat lightly. How silly of me. I must have overheard. Honoria saw the Duke observe the correction. He did not yet understand its shape, but he had begun to see that a shape existed. I can go, Honoria said. Lady Maud frowned. You need not. No, my lady, but I am able. That mattered. Not because of camellias, nor because Lady Seraphina wished to be rid of her for a quarter hour. It mattered because Honoria had been placed in this house as something between guest and dependent, and refusal could be twisted into ingratitude as easily as obedience could be twisted into servility. She rose, smoothing her cuff over the torn seam. If Mrs. Bell requires a particular color, I shall ask her first. White, Seraphina said quickly. The white ones, if you please. They bruise if handled clumsily. Then I shall endeavor not to bruise them. Do. Seraphina's voice was light. Some delicate things don't survive rough handling. The Duke turned his head toward her. And some survive because they were never delicate. Again, silence. Honoria did not permit herself to look grateful. She curtsied to Lady Maud and left the room with the ivory book still open on the table behind her, the hidden card burning in her memory more sharply than any written instruction. The east walk ran along the side of the house, bordered by clipped yew and early primrose. The hothouse stood beyond the kitchen garden, a long structure of glass and pale brick, warm mist clouding its panes. Honoria found Mrs. Bell, the housekeeper, near the still room and received a basket and a pair of shears. The woman's eyes paused on her gloves but said nothing. In a great house, silence could be kindness or training. Honoria was not yet sure which Barrow-mere preferred. The hothouse smelled of damp earth, orange leaves, and trapped sunlight. Heat pressed against Honoria's face as she stepped inside. Rows of camellias bloomed in porcelain tubs, their white petals heavy and flawless, each one cultivated to look untouched by labor. She chose 6 carefully. The flowers trembled when clipped, and their fallen petals looked almost too pale against the dark soil. She had just placed the last stem in the basket when the outer door clicked. It was a soft sound. A small sound. But it traveled through her bones. Honoria turned. Mrs. Bell. No answer came. She crossed to the door and pressed the latch. It did not move. She tried again, slowly, because panic was expensive and she could not afford it. The latch held. Outside the glass, the east walk lay empty beneath a mild sky. Sunlight touched the gravel. A blackbird hopped along the low wall and flew away. Honoria set the basket down. Is anyone there? Her voice sounded too thin in the heated air. She struck the glass once with her gloved hand, then stopped. The panes were old. Breaking one would create more scandal than escape. She looked for another door and found only the narrow service entrance at the far end, bolted from outside. The heat thickened. 10 minutes passed, perhaps 15. Time lost its proper edges in the damp warmth. Honoria removed one glove, then thought better of it and put it back on. A lady might be found overheated. A lady might even be found frightened. She must not be found disordered if she could help it. She took the shears and tried to lift the latch through the narrow gap near the frame. The doeskin caught on a bent nail. When she pulled free, the old seam tore from thumb to wrist with a sound like a whispered accusation. For one instant, her composure deserted her. She stared at the pale strip of her hand exposed through the broken glove and felt something small and weary rise in her throat. Not tears. She would not waste those here. Not among flowers chosen for a woman who had smiled while sending her into a glass box. She folded the torn leather inward and knocked again. 3 times. Then 3 more. Not frantic. Measured. If no one came, she would continue until someone did. If no one listened, that would also be an answer. Outside, footsteps crunched on gravel. Honoria held still. A shadow crossed the glass. The latch rattled once from the outside, then lifted. The door opened, and cool air entered like mercy. The Duke stood in the doorway, hatless, his expression stripped of its usual distance. Miss Vale. Honoria stepped toward the threshold and found that her knees disliked the attempt. She steadied herself against the doorframe before he could reach for her. I was delayed, Your Grace. His gaze moved from her face to the ruined glove, then to the latch. You were locked in. The door would not open. That isn't the same thing. His voice had changed. It had sharpened, not at her, but around her. Who sent you here? Honoria looked past him toward the house. In an upper window, a curtain shifted and fell still. Lady Seraphina requested camellias for the blue drawing room. Requested? Yes. And you came alone? I came on an errand within the grounds of a respectable house. Respectable houses often hide their worst behavior behind that word. He turned toward a passing gardener who had stopped with a rake in hand. Find Lady Maud. Now. Tell Mrs. Bell to bring water to the east parlor. No one is to speak of Miss Vale's condition below stairs. The gardener fled. Honoria stiffened. My condition. The Duke looked back at her, and for the first time since her arrival, his severity seemed less like judgment than restraint. You are overheated, and you are standing because pride is holding you upright. Pride is sometimes the only chair offered. Then allow me to offer a better one. The words were formal enough for propriety and gentle enough to disarm her. He did not touch her. He stepped aside and let her pass into the air, walking near enough to catch her if she faltered, far enough that no watching eye could call it intimacy. It was the first kindness he had shown that did not feel like correction. That made it harder to receive. Lady Maud met them in the east parlour 5 minutes later, her face pale beneath its powder. Mrs. Bell brought water and vinegar cloths. Honoria sat by the open window and answered every question with care. No, she had not seen who closed the door. No, she had not heard a voice. No, she would not accuse without proof. Lady Maud looked murderous. The Duke looked silent. That was worse. You should rest, he said. I should return the camellias before they wilt. Lady Maud snapped, damn the camellias. Honoria almost smiled. My lady, I believe that is the first sensible thing said of them. The Duke lowered his eyes, but not before she saw the faint relief in them. When Mrs. Bell took the basket away, a torn strip of doeskin fell from Honoria's glove to the carpet. Honoria reached for it, but the Duke was closer. He picked it up carefully, as though it were not a ruined scrap but testimony. Your Grace, it is only leather. No, he said. It is not. Later, after Lady Maud insisted Honoria retire for an hour and after Mrs. Bell left a tray of tea in her room, the Duke returned alone to the hothouse. He examined the outer latch, the bent nail, the service bolt, and the place where the door had held against Honoria's hand. On the iron catch, near the hinge, he found a smear of green wax pressed into the groove. He touched it with the tip of his penknife and lifted a flake no larger than a seed. Green sealing wax. The same color he had seen that morning on Lady Seraphina's correspondence. He stood there for a long moment while the hothouse breathed around him, warm and fragrant and false. Then he carried the wax, the torn strip of glove, and the memory of Honoria saying she had been delayed back to his study. On his desk lay the calling card he had taken from Lady Maud's table after Seraphina left the room. Mr. Edwin Pike. Solicitor. Chancery Lane. The Duke placed the torn glove fragment beside it and stared at the two small objects until the afternoon light began to fade. Barrow-mere Park had expected Miss Vale to break. Instead, something else in the house had begun to show its seam. By the following afternoon, Barrow-mere Park no longer felt like a house that had received guests. It felt like a stage that had been polished until no one could see the trapdoors. Carriages arrived in measured succession along the drive, their wheels whispering over the gravel, their doors opening to release ladies in pale travelling gowns and gentlemen with watch chains, gloves, and opinions. Footmen carried valises toward the guest wing. Maids vanished upstairs with hat boxes. The housekeeper moved like a general disguised in black silk. Everywhere Honoria turned, something was being arranged for the announcement that would make Lady Seraphina Lorne the future Duchess of Calder-mere. White camellias were set in the blue drawing-room, though Honoria had not been asked to touch them again. Ivory ribbons appeared on the backs of chairs. Silver candlesticks were lined along the dining table with such precision that their reflections seemed to multiply the wealth of the room. Lady Seraphina stood at the center of it all, giving suggestions so gently that servants obeyed before they seemed to realize they had been commanded. The flowers are charming, Mrs. Bell, but not there. A little nearer the mirror. Yes, that's better. The effect should be elegant, not funereal. Honoria stood near Lady Maud's chair with a correspondence tray in her hands and watched the transformation. Seraphina did not look at her often. That was intentional. A direct stare could be challenged. An absence was harder to answer. The Duke entered the blue drawing-room just as Seraphina adjusted a ribbon at the mantel. His gaze moved first to his aunt, then to the flowers, then to Honoria's hands. She had chosen an older pair of black kid gloves that morning, thinner than the ruined doeskin ones but whole enough to pass inspection from across a room. She wondered whether he knew the difference. His eyes said that he did. "You should not be standing so long," he said quietly as he passed her. "I am holding a tray, Your Grace, not a mountain. Some burdens are disguised as smaller objects. Then I shall be careful not to drop it." His mouth tightened, not quite a smile. "Do." It was nothing. A handful of words in a crowded room. Yet Seraphina's fingers paused on the ribbon. She had heard. Honoria lowered her gaze to the tray, where invitations and replies lay in neat stacks. Her body remembered the hothouse heat each time sunlight touched glass. Her mind remembered something else. Green wax on a latch. A solicitor's card in a correspondence book. A duke who had picked up torn leather as though it mattered. At the far end of the room, the Earl of Davonwick entered with Lord Meryton and Mrs. Anstruther, both newly arrived and eager to admire what they had not yet been shown. The Earl laughed too loudly at something Lord Meryton said, then clapped the man lightly on the shoulder. His manner was expansive, but Honoria noticed the restless movement of his eyes. They moved over the mirrors, the doors, the writing table, the Duke, the servants, and finally his daughter. Seraphina gave the smallest shake of her head. The Earl stopped smiling for half a second. "Calder-mere," he said, crossing the room with both hands extended as though he were greeting an equal he had already forgiven. "Your house exceeds itself. Even my late wife, who could find fault with paradise if the harp-strings were dusty, would have approved." "Then Barrow-mere is fortunate to escape correction," the Duke said. It sounded courteous. It was not warm. The Earl laughed again. "Ah, always dry. That is why England needs men like you. A cool head, a great name, and a property that still understands duty. The alliance between our houses will please every sensible person from Hampshire to Mayfair." Seraphina turned from the mantel with perfect modesty. "Papa, you will make his Grace think we discuss nothing but alliances." "My dear girl, every happy marriage is an alliance blessed by affection." He looked at the Duke. "And every prudent alliance steadies more than two hearts." Honoria felt Lady Maud shift beside her. The old woman's voice cut in gently. "How comforting! I had wondered whether hearts were invited." Lord Meryton laughed because he thought it safe. Mrs. Anstruther did not. The Duke's face revealed nothing. "Prudence has its uses," he said. "So does clarity." The Earl's smile stretched. "Clarity is precisely why Thursday matters. Once the announcement is made, idle tongues will have no room to invent." Honoria understood then what she had been too inexperienced in ducal houses to grasp at once. The announcement was not only celebration. It was a lock. Once society heard that Lady Seraphina Lorne was to be Duchess of Calder-mere, questions would become embarrassments. Hesitations would become insults. The Duke would still have power, but his power would be bound by his own name. Seraphina crossed to him and handed him a folded list. "The seating for Thursday, if you approve. I place Lady Maud near me. Miss Vale can remain close enough to assist her." "Assist how?" the Duke asked. Seraphina blinked with innocent surprise. "With shawls, letters, whatever Lady Maud requires. I only meant to be useful." "Miss Vale attends my aunt," he said. "She is not a convenience for the room." The words were mild, but the correction stood upright in the air. Honoria kept her expression still. She would not look grateful. She would not look pleased. She would not hand Seraphina the satisfaction of seeing the protection was needed. Lady Maud reached for the top letter on the tray. "Miss Vale, have we answered Lady Rothbury?" "Yes, my lady. She accepts for Thursday and asks whether Lady Seraphina prefers white roses or lilies." "White roses," Seraphina said. "Lilies can be so severe." "White roses die faster," Lady Maud murmured. "Not if one replaces them before anyone notices," Seraphina replied, and turned the remark into a smile. The conversation moved on, but Honoria carried the words with her as she left the drawing room to deliver Lady Maud's replies to the housekeeper's office. A great house trained a person to notice roots. The family corridor gave way to the back passage near the still room, then to a narrower turn that passed behind the morning room. Honoria had almost reached the corner when she heard the Earl's voice from beyond a half-closed door. "You were careless yesterday." Seraphina answered low. And yet she said nothing. Because she has nothing. She has eyes, Papa. Eyes are not evidence. His Grace is not a fool. No, worse. He is a man who enjoys believing himself just. There was a pause, and Honoria stopped breathing evenly. The tray in her hands felt suddenly heavy. Pike must not reach his Grace before the announcement, the Earl said. After Thursday, Calder-mere will think twice before humiliating both families. Seraphina's voice sharpened beneath its softness. And if Pike arrives early, then he will be delayed. You've promised too much. I promised what was necessary. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with fear. Honoria stepped back before the door could open, but her heel brushed the edge of a coal scuttle left near the wall. The sound was small. Too small, perhaps, for ordinary guilt. Too loud for hidden listening. Inside the room, Seraphina stopped speaking. Honoria turned at once and walked toward the servants' passage, not quickly enough to be flight, not slowly enough to be found waiting. She reached the morning room with her pulse steady only because she commanded it to be. Lady Maud was not there. The fire had been recently stirred, and a faint ribbon of smoke clung low in the grate. Honoria crossed to the writing table to set down the tray, then saw a dark curl of paper near the brass fender. Someone had burned a note in haste. Not completely. She looked toward the door. No footsteps. No voices. She knelt, taking care not to blacken her gloves more than necessary, and lifted the fragment by its cleanest corner. Most of the page had been eaten by flame, but a few words remained in a slanted hand. Settlement cannot be honored. Further delay dangerous. Pike expected before Thursday. The edge crumbled against her fingers. She read it once more, committing every word to memory, then slipped the fragment into the folded blotting paper beside Lady Maud's inkstand. She had no right to accuse. Not yet. A poor woman with a burned scrap and an overheard sentence could be called imaginative, spiteful, ambitious, or unwell, depending on which insult best served the listener. But truth had weight, even when small. A calling card. A smear of green wax. A torn glove. A half-burned warning. One by one, the little things were beginning to gather. Behind her, the door opened. Honoria turned. Lady Seraphina stood in the threshold, her blue silk catching the grey afternoon light. Her eyes moved at once to the grate, then to Honoria's gloved hands. "How diligent you are, Miss Vale. Always appearing where one doesn't expect you. Lady Maud asked me to bring the correspondence." "Of course." Seraphina stepped inside and let the door fall almost shut behind her. "You must find Barrow-mere very instructive. Most houses are. And what has this one taught you?" Honoria held the tray a little closer. "That beautiful rooms can still have draughts." For the first time since they had met, Seraphina did not smile at once. When she did, it was colder than the hothouse glass. "Then take care you don't stand in the wrong one." She crossed to the grate, glanced down, and saw only ash. Honoria had already turned toward the door, but she felt the other woman's gaze settle between her shoulder blades like a touch made of ice. The engagement had not yet been announced, but its silence had begun to demand sacrifices. Honoria understood now that Lady Seraphina was not merely defending a future title. She was defending a secret. And secrets, once cornered, rarely waited politely to be exposed. The formal dinner rehearsal began as all quiet cruelties at Barrow-mere Park seemed to begin, beneath the appearance of order. By 6 o'clock, the dining room had been lit, though no full meal would be served there until Thursday. Candles stood ready in their silver branches. Place cards lay in a careful row beside the Duke's secretary's list. The long mahogany table shone so darkly that the chandelier above looked trapped inside it. Honoria stood near Lady Maud's chair with the correspondence tray held against her waist, while servants moved behind the high-backed seats under Mrs. Bell's watchful eye. It was not a rehearsal in any theatrical sense. It was worse. It was a lesson in where every person belonged before the watching world arrived to confirm it. Lady Seraphina moved along the table with a folded seating plan in one hand and a blue ribbon trailing from the other. She had changed into cream silk for the evening, simple enough to imply modesty and expensive enough to make the implication unnecessary. "Lord Meryton cannot sit beside Mrs. Anstruther," she said. "He finds her opinions fatiguing, and she finds his deafness convenient. Papa should be nearer his grace. Aunt Maud, naturally, must be near enough to be comfortable." "Comfort is rarely a consequence of being near your father," Lady Maud said from her wheeled chair, where she had placed herself like a commander at the edge of a battlefield. Seraphina smiled as if the remark had been affectionate. Then we must rescue Papa with good wine. The Earl of Davonwick, who stood near the mantel with Lord Meryton, gave a loud laugh. The Duke did not. He was at the head of the table, reviewing the list with the expression of a man who knew every rule of precedence and despised the uses to which people put them. Honoria noticed that he had placed a small paperweight over one corner of the plan, preventing Seraphina from moving the card marked Miss Vale entirely away from Lady Maud's place. Seraphina noticed too. That was why, when she came around the table, she stopped beside Honoria with sudden brightness. Miss Vale, how fortunate! You have such capable hands. Honoria lowered the tray slightly. I hope so, my lady. The train of my gown has caught beneath the leg of this chair. Would you be so good? It was a little thing. That was its power. No one would call it an insult in a room where servants adjusted chairs and ladies accepted assistance as naturally as breath. Yet Honoria was not Seraphina's maid. She was not even attached to Seraphina. Every eye in the room understood the difference. The train had not caught badly. Seraphina had stepped so that it would appear to have done so. Honoria saw the silk lying beside the chair leg, saw the footman who could have moved it if asked, saw the Earl waiting with amused expectation. She also saw Lady Maud's fingers tighten on the head of her cane. A refusal would make her seem proud. Obedience would place her lower before every person present. Honoria set the correspondence tray on the nearest sideboard. She crossed to the chair, bent only as much as courtesy required, and lifted the silk free with care. The fabric was smooth, cool, and costly beneath her black glove. There, my lady. Seraphina looked down at her. How deft. It must be a comfort to know one can always be useful. Honoria straightened. The room went quiet enough for the candles to seem loud. Usefulness can be a comfort, she said. But service offered in kindness should not be mistaken for inferiority. A footman's hand froze on the back of a chair. Mrs. Bell looked down at her household keys. Lord Meryton blinked as though he had misheard. The Earl of Davonwick's face tightened. Seraphina did not lose her smile, but the softness left it. I hope you don't imagine I meant offence. No, my lady, Honoria said. I imagine offence rarely announces itself honestly. Lady Maud made a satisfied sound. The Duke lifted his eyes from the seating plan. For one measured second, he looked not at Seraphina, not at his aunt, but at Honoria. She felt the weight of that look through the neat armour of her gown. It did not ask whether she required rescue. It acknowledged that she had already stood. Then he moved the paperweight aside and took up the place card with her name. The arrangement is incorrect, he said. Seraphina turned to him. Is it? Yes. He placed Honoria's card to the right of Lady Maud's setting. Miss Vale sits here. The Earl's brows rose. Calder-mere, that is rather close to the family end of the table for a temporary companion. It is close to my aunt, the Duke replied. Which is the purpose of a companion? Of course, the Earl said, though his voice made a protest of the words. One only wishes to avoid confusion. A table speaks. Then mine should speak accurately. The correction was quiet. It was absolute. Honoria looked at the place card now lying beside Lady Maud's. It was only pasteboard, ink, and position. Yet in a house like this, position could wound or shelter. Seraphina reached for another card, then stopped herself. How considerate of you, Alistair. The Duke's gaze did not warm. I try to be precise. Precision is such a masculine virtue, she said. Women are expected to rely more upon grace. Grace, Lady Maud said, is often what people call calculation when it is well dressed. Seraphina gave a small laugh, but Honoria saw colour rise along her throat. The rehearsal continued. Seats shifted. Names were discussed. The Earl pressed for proximity to the Duke. Lady Maud objected to 3 boars and 1 woman she claimed laughed like a trapped pheasant. Through it all, Honoria remained near her newly assigned chair, copying changes onto the smaller list Lady Maud would use on Thursday. She wrote carefully. Her torn doeskin glove was folded in her room, but her right hand remembered the missing support. Each time Seraphina passed, the air seemed to grow more polished and less breathable. At last Mrs. Bell entered with the evening post on a silver salver. She took it first to the Duke, then to Lady Maud. Honoria received the letters Lady Maud indicated and sorted them by hand. One envelope lay beneath a larger invitation and nearly escaped notice. It was addressed to His Grace the Duke of Calder-mere in a clerk's firm hand. The seal had been damaged, not opened fully, but rubbed as if someone had tested the wax. The corner bore a small mark from Chancery Lane. Honoria's fingers stilled. Seraphina, who had been speaking to Lord Meryton about roses, turned her head too quickly. "Another bill, perhaps," she said lightly. "Men of property are so plagued by paper." The Duke held out his hand. "Then I shall suffer it directly." Honoria placed the envelope into his palm. Their gloves touched for half a heartbeat. Nothing more. Yet his eyes moved to hers, and she knew he had seen the Chancery Lane mark before she did. Seraphina stepped nearer. "If it concerns Thursday, I can help. Papa has been dealing with tiresome settlement matters for weeks." "That will not be necessary," the Duke said. "My correspondence remains my own." The Earl came forward, his laugh too quick. "A bride's family only wishes to be useful." "Usefulness," Honoria said before she could stop herself, "is sometimes a comfort." Lady Maud looked at her with open approval. The Duke slipped the letter inside his coat. Seraphina's smile thinned. The rehearsal ended soon after, not because the table was settled, but because the air had become too crowded with things unsaid. Guests drifted toward the drawing room. Servants began removing unused glasses. Honoria collected Lady Maud's papers and turned toward the door, but Seraphina stopped beside her. No one stood close enough to hear except perhaps the Duke, who remained at the head of the table with one hand resting on the back of his chair. Seraphina's gaze lowered to Honoria's black gloves. "Not the doeskin pair tonight?" she asked. "They are being mended." "How wise." "Some things split because they were never made to endure." Honoria held the papers against her breast. "Or because someone pulled at the seam." Seraphina's face went still. The Duke looked up. It was only a glance, but it crossed the room like a blade finding light. Lady Seraphina turned away first. That, more than any answer, told Honoria that the week was no longer testing whether she would last. It was testing what Lady Seraphina would do when she realized Honoria might. On the fifth morning, Barrow-mere Park woke with the nervous Polish of a house pretending it had the fifth morning. Barrow-mere Park woke with the nervous Polish of a house pretending it not begun to distrust itself. The engagement supper was 1 day away. The blue drawing room had been rearranged twice before breakfast. The white roses had replaced the camellias, though Honoria noticed 3 camellia petals in the corridor outside Lady Seraphina's room, pale and bruised at the edges. No one else seemed to see them. That was the advantage of being considered unimportant. One could look down without being accused of searching. Lady Maud had slept badly, so Honoria carried her letters to the small sitting room near the east windows and read aloud the replies from guests who were already inside the house but still found it necessary to communicate through paper. Lady Rothbury wished to know whether the announcement would occur before or after dessert. Lord Meryton regretted that he had misplaced his spectacles. Mistress Anstruther sent compliments upon the flowers she had criticized in private the night before. Honoria read each message clearly, and Lady Maud listened with her eyes closed, one hand resting on the silver head of her cane. "There is no sound in England more exhausting than good breeding under pressure," Lady Maud said. "Yes, my lady." "You agree too calmly. Have you always been this composed?" Honoria folded the letter in her lap. "No. I have simply learned that panic takes more strength than I usually have to spare." Lady Maud opened one eye. "That is not an answer a happy girl gives." "No, my lady." Before Lady Maud could press further, a frightened movement sounded beyond the door. It was not a proper knock. It was the hesitation of someone who knew she might be scolded for needing help. Honoria rose and opened the door to find a young under-housemaid standing in the corridor, her cap slightly crooked, her face white with distress. She could not have been more than 17. Honoria had seen her before carrying coal scuttles and fresh towels. "What is it?" Honoria asked softly. The girl glanced past her toward Lady Maud and nearly curtsied herself into tears. "Begging your pardon, miss." Mistress Bell sent me to ask if any letters were left here by mistake. There was one for His Grace. It came with the morning tray. I set it down by the salver, I know I did, but it is gone, and Lady Seraphina's maid says I must have tucked it into my apron or dropped it near the stairs. Lady Maud sat forward. What is your name? Annie, my lady. And did you tuck His Grace's letter into your apron? No, my lady. I wouldn't. I don't read anything. I don't even look. My mother would box my ears from Portsmouth if she heard I touched a gentleman's letter. The poor girl's voice broke on the last word. Honoria saw the danger at once. A missing letter in a ducal house could ruin a servant faster than a crime because suspicion needed so little proof when it fell downward. Where did you last see it? Honoria asked. On the tray outside the breakfast room, miss. It had a mark from London. The corner was bent. I remember because I thought the post must have been handled rough on the road. Was Lady Seraphina near the tray? Annie swallowed. Her maid was. Which maid? Martha, miss. Honoria did not look at Lady Maud, though she felt the old woman's attention sharpen. Go to Mistress Bell and say that Lady Maud has asked the matter not be discussed below stairs until she has spoken with the housekeeper herself. But if they think I took it, then they will be wrong for a little while, Honoria said. That is not the same as being ruined. Annie looked at her as though kindness had frightened her more than accusation. Thank you, miss. Walk slowly, Honoria added. In a house like this, haste looks guilty even when it is only fear. When the girl had gone, Lady Maud remained silent for 3 breaths. You made an enemy just now. Honoria closed the door. I think I already had one. Seraphina dislikes interference. Then she should stop arranging events that require it. Lady Maud laughed once, a dry sound, but it faded quickly. The letter was likely from Pike. Honoria turned. You know of him. My dear, I know of most things in my nephew's house. I do not always know them in time. She leaned back, suddenly older. Alastair has been raised to believe that a great name must never be seen to stumble. It makes him useful in Parliament, formidable in society, and occasionally blind in his own drawing room. Honoria thought of the Duke lifting the torn strip of glove from the parlour carpet. He is not blind to everything. No, Lady Maud said. That is why Seraphina is becoming careless. Across the house, in the steward's office, the Duke of Calder-mere stood with one hand on the mantel and listened while Mr. Hart, his steward of 15 years, placed facts in a row as neatly as accounts. The Earl of Davonwick has borrowed against 2 properties already entailed beyond his free use, Your Grace. There are mortgages, private notes, and 1 disputed settlement from his late wife's portion. How disputed? Enough that a careful solicitor would hesitate. And Pike is careful. By reputation, yes. Chancery Lane. Dry as dust, but not easily frightened. The Duke looked toward the window. From there, he could see the side path where Honoria had walked back from the hothouse 2 days earlier, pale but upright, refusing to say more than she could prove. He had seen pride before. Pride was common in the aristocracy. It strutted, announced, demanded room. Honoria's pride did none of those things. It held the door shut from the inside until dignity could stand unaided. A letter came this morning, the Duke said. It has not reached me. Mr. Hart's expression did not change, which meant he understood the seriousness of the statement. Shall I question the hall porter? Quietly. No servant is to be dismissed or threatened over this. If someone has taken it, blame will not be placed on the easiest neck. Yes, Your Grace. The steward hesitated. There is another matter. The under-housemaid Annie was near the tray. Lady Seraphina's maid has been speaking below stairs. Of course she has. The Duke's voice cooled. Send word to Mistress Bell that Annie is not to be touched. If Lady Seraphina's maid has an accusation, she may bring it to me and discover what accusations cost when they are made for sport. Mr. Hart bowed and withdrew. The Duke remained alone with the accounts, the damaged seal from the previous letter, the green wax flake, and the strip of doeskin glove placed in the locked drawer of his desk. He had been tempted that morning to send to Winchester for the finest pair of gloves money could buy and have them delivered anonymously to Miss Vale's room. It would have been easy. It would also have been cowardice dressed as generosity. A woman like Honoria did not need gifts that erased evidence before anyone admitted what had been done. She needed to be believed before she was adorned. That thought unsettled him more than Seraphina's debts. Near dusk, as the house settled into the uneasy pause before dressing for dinner, the Duke passed the open door of the little east sitting room and stopped without intending to. Honoria sat alone by the window, the last light touching the side of her face. Lady Maud's correspondence lay stacked beside her. In her lap was the torn doeskin glove, the one she had not worn that day. She was mending it again with thread too pale for the leather. Every stitch was small. Every stitch was stubborn. He should have moved on. Instead, the floorboard betrayed him. Honoria looked up. She did not hide the glove. That, he realized, was new. Your Grace. Miss Vale. He stepped no farther than the threshold. I heard you spoke for Annie. I ask that truth be slower than gossip. That is not always possible in houses like this. No. But it is sometimes possible in men like you. The words struck him with more force because she said them without pleading. He deserved neither the accusation nor the hope, and yet she had offered both in the same sentence. You think I can stop it? I think you can decide what receives your authority. He looked at the glove in her lap. And what should receive it now? The missing letter. The girl who will be blamed for it. And whatever Lady Seraphina fears enough to keep touching seals that do not belong to her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The house moved around them with muffled footsteps and distant bells. At last he said, Mr. Pike is expected before the supper tomorrow. Honoria's needle paused. Then tomorrow will not be gentle. No, his gaze held hers. But I begin to suspect gentleness was never the quality I should have looked for in you. She lowered her eyes to the glove and pulled the thread through. No, Your Grace. I have had little use for it. He left her then, because staying would have turned respect into intrusion. But as he walked back toward his study, the message he had been waiting for arrived in the hands of a footman breathless from the drive. A man from Chancery Lane had taken rooms at the village inn. Mr. Edwin Pike would present himself at Barrow-mere Park before the engagement supper. The Duke took the card, read it once, and closed his fingers over it. The week had not broken Honoria Vale. By tomorrow, it might break the engagement instead. The supper began with candlelight bright enough to make every deception look ceremonial. By 8 o'clock, the dining room at Barrow-mere Park held 24 guests, 3 generations of polished opinion, and 1 empty space where truth had not yet arrived. Honoria stood beside Lady Maud's chair as the company settled, her black glove smooth over hands that had learned too much in 5 days. The torn doeskin pair lay hidden in her room, folded beneath her workbag like a witness waiting to be called. She could feel their absence as sharply as if the split seam still pressed her palm. At the head of the table, the Duke of Calder-mere appeared composed, but Honoria had begun to recognize the difference between stillness and ease. His stillness tonight was a closed door with light beneath it. Every few minutes, his gaze moved toward the dining room entrance, then to Mr. Hart near the sideboard, then to Lady Seraphina, who sat in pale ivory silk beside her father as if already painted into the family portraits. No announcement had yet been made, but the room behaved as if it had. Guests softened their voices when speaking to her. Ladies studied her gown. Gentlemen offered the careful attentions due a woman about to rise higher than most of them could reach. Seraphina accepted it all with lowered lashes and a smile that made humility look expensive. Miss Vale, Lady Maud murmured without turning her head, if I drop my fork, let it lie. I should like to see whether anyone has the courage to survive the scandal. Honoria leaned closer. My lady, I believe forks have survived worse than dinner society. Lady Maud's mouth trembled with suppressed amusement. Across the table, the Duke heard enough to look over. For a moment, his expression eased. Then Earl Davenwick lifted his glass. To houses that understand permanence, he declared. To old names, prudent unions, and the happy duty of preserving what lesser families can only admire. A few guests smiled. A few drank. Honoria noticed the Duke did neither at once. He lifted his glass only after the pores had become visible. Lady Seraphina touched the pearl bracelet at her wrist, a delicate thing of gold links and small milk-white stones. "Papa grows sentimental when he is pleased," she said. "I'm afraid we must forgive him." "I have been forgiving him for 40 years, Lady Maud said. "It has not improved him." The room laughed, because Lady Maud's age permitted rudeness when truth would have been intolerable from anyone younger. The first course passed. Soup, fish, soft talk, silver lifted and lowered, servants moving like shadows trained to anticipate appetite. Honoria remained behind Lady Maud, answering small needs, adjusting the old woman's shawl once when the draught crept from the terrace doors. She was not seated, though her card remained near Lady Maud's place. At the last minute, Lady Maud had insisted that Honoria stand until the announcement, claiming she required assistance with correspondence before the gentlemen separated. It was a fiction, but a protective one. Honoria understood it. So did Seraphina. Near the end of the second course, Lady Seraphina gave a small sound and looked down at her wrist. How odd. Her voice was soft enough to invite attention without seeming to demand it. Lord Meryton, who sat nearest, bent forward. "My lady." Seraphina touched her bare wrist. The pearl bracelet was gone. The effect was immediate. Not dramatic. Worse. Precise. Her hand moved to her lap, then to the table edge, then to the fold of her gown. It was here a moment ago. The Earl set down his glass. "What is missing?" "My bracelet." "The Calder-mere pearls." Silence went through the room like a drawn thread. Honoria felt Lady Maud become utterly still. The Duke's eyes went to Seraphina's wrist, then to the carpet beneath her chair. "No one move," he said. He did not raise his voice, but every servant stopped as if a bell had been struck. Seraphina gave a faint laugh. "Alastair, please." "It must have fallen." "There's no need for severity." "Then it will be found where it fell." The housekeeper was summoned. Mrs. Bell searched the immediate area with 2 footmen, every movement careful enough to avoid even the appearance of accusation. Nothing lay beneath the table. Nothing had caught in the silk of Seraphina's gown. Nothing glittered beside the chair legs. The Earl's face darkened by calculated degrees. "A family bracelet does not vanish into air." "No," the Duke said. "It does not." Then Seraphina's maid, Martha, appeared in the doorway, pale and breathless, holding something wrapped in a handkerchief. Honoria knew before the cloth opened. The body sometimes understood a trap before the mind wasted hope. Martha curtsied so low her cap ribbons trembled. "Begging pardon, Your Grace. Mistress Bell told us to check the nearby rooms, and I thought perhaps Lady Seraphina might have left it when she changed her gloves." Mrs. Bell turned sharply. "I gave no such instruction to search private chambers." Martha swallowed. "I only meant to help." The handkerchief unfolded. The pearl bracelet lay in the center, innocent and gleaming. "Where was it found?" the Duke asked. Martha's eye slid once toward Seraphina, then away. "In Miss Vale's trunk, Your Grace." The room did not gasp. It inhaled. That was more terrible. Every face turned toward Honoria with a readiness that had been waiting for permission. The poor companion. The repaired gown. The worn gloves. The woman no one knew, standing near jewels and rank. Suspicion did not have to travel far. It had already taken its seat before the first course. Seraphina rose slowly, one hand at her throat. No. There must be some mistake. Her performance was nearly perfect. The compassion arrived first, then distress, then reluctant injury. Miss Vale wouldn't be so foolish. The Earl pushed back his chair. Foolishness is not required for theft. Only temptation. Lady Maud's cane struck the floor. "Davenwick, you will choose your next word with care." Honoria stood very straight. She felt heat in her face, but not shame. Shame required guilt, and she would not borrow what belonged to someone else. "May I ask who opened my trunk?" she said. Martha looked down. The housekeeper answered, voice tight with anger. "No one had my permission." "Then I ask that it be examined again," Honoria said. Not by Lady Seraphina's maid. By Lady Maud, Mrs. Bell, and the steward. The Earl gave an incredulous laugh. You are hardly in a position to dictate terms. No, Honoria said. I am in a position to request witnesses before more imagination is added to the evidence. A murmur moved down the table. Lady Seraphina's eyes flashed, then softened at once. Miss Vale, don't make this worse for yourself. If you were frightened, if you made an error, His Grace may show mercy. The words were velvet over a blade. Mercy, offered before judgment, was only another form of conviction. Honoria looked at the Duke. He had not moved. That was what hurt. Not his face, which had gone cold enough to frighten the room. Not his silence, which might yet conceal thought. It was the fraction of a pause before he spoke. A pause long enough for every guest to see that he was weighing her. No one will touch Miss Vale's belongings again, he said at last, except in the presence of Lady Maud, Mrs. Bell, and Mr. Hart. Relief did not come. Not fully. He had not declared her innocent. He had protected the process, not the woman. Honoria understood the difference with painful clarity. Still, it was something. Thank you, Your Grace, she said, because courtesy was armor, even when dented. The Duke held out his hand to Martha. The bracelet. The maid placed it on his palm. He looked at it for a long moment, then lifted it slightly toward the candlelight. His expression altered. Barely. Honoria would have missed it once. Not now. Lady Seraphina, he said, when did you last wear camellia oil? Seraphina blinked. Camellia oil. The bracelet carries the scent. My dressing table holds many oils. Martha may have wrapped it in one of my cloths. Perhaps. The word was mild. It convinced no one who knew how to listen. The Earl cut in. Calder-mere, surely we need not conduct a household trial over supper. Dismiss the girl quietly. Protect the dignity of the evening. Whose dignity? Lady Maud asked. Her voice was thin, but it reached every corner of the room. The Duke closed his fingers around the bracelet. The evening can endure delay. Seraphina's face tightened. For the first time, fear showed through the polish. Then, from the hall beyond the dining room, footsteps hurried over marble. A footman appeared and bowed to the Duke. Your Grace, a gentleman has arrived from the village inn. Mr. Edwin Pike of Chancery Lane. Before the Duke could answer, Earl Davernwick stepped forward too quickly. I shall receive him. This is a family matter. The Duke's gaze moved from the bracelet to the Earl. Honoria saw the room tilt toward another secret. The accusation against her had not ended. It had only opened the wrong door. The footman's announcement left the dining room suspended between accusation and exposure. Mr. Edwin Pike of Chancery Lane waited somewhere beyond the marble hall, carrying whatever truth Earl Davernwick feared enough to interrupt. Honoria saw that fear pass across the Earl's face before he smoothed it into indignation. It was brief, but it was real. The Duke saw it too. He held Lady Seraphina's pearl bracelet in one hand, its scent of camellia oil faint beneath the heavier perfume of candles and roasted herbs. Mr. Pike came to see me, he said. He will be received by me. Calder-mere, this is not the hour, Davernwick replied, stepping closer with the authority of a man who mistook volume for rank. Your guests are at table. My daughter has been distressed. A theft has been discovered. Surely a solicitor's errand can wait until morning. A false accusation cannot. The Duke's answer was so quiet that it drew more attention than anger would have done. Lady Seraphina lowered herself back into her chair, one hand pressed to her bare wrist. Her eyes were wide with hurt, but Honoria noticed that she did not look toward Martha. The maid had already shrunk near the door as though she wished the carpet would open and swallow her. Lady Maud's cane rested across her knees. Her face was pale, but her gaze remained fixed on the Duke. Honoria understood that the next moment would decide more than where a bracelet had been found. It would decide whether she stood in that room as a person or as a convenient explanation. The Duke turned to Mr. Hart. Take Mr. Pike to the West Library. I shall join him directly. Davernwick moved at once. I must insist on being present. You may insist from where you are. A murmur travelled along the table. The Earl flushed. Lady Seraphina's lips parted as if in delicate alarm. Then she did the cleverest thing she could have done. She did not protest for herself. She looked at Honoria with wounded mercy. "Alistair, please. Whatever else is happening, Miss Vale must be spared further embarrassment. If this becomes a spectacle, everyone will speak of her. You know they will." It sounded compassionate. It was poison poured into warm milk. Honoria felt every guest consider the point and find it comfortable. Send the poor companion away. Question the solicitor quietly. Protect the supper, the engagement, the future duchess, and the great name. Leave a stain on the woman already stained by poverty. The Duke's jaw tightened. For one breath, Honoria believed he would refuse the trap entirely. Then Davin leaned closer and drew a folded paper from inside his coat. "Before you receive Pike, you should see what he has already been sent." The paper was passed into the Duke's hand. He opened it. His expression altered so little that only someone watching him with painful care would notice. Honoria was watching. She saw the stillness deepen. She saw his eyes move once toward her, not coldly, not with contempt, but with a question he did not wish to ask. That was enough. "Your Grace?" Lady Maud said. "Not here," the Duke replied. He folded the paper again. "Mr. Hart, see Mr. Pike to the West Library. No one else is to approach him. Mrs. Bell, take Martha to your sitting room and keep her there until I send for her. Miss Vale's trunk will remain closed until Lady Maud is present." "And Miss Vale?" Davin demanded. The Duke looked at Honoria. There was restraint in him. There was conflict. There was also hesitation, and hesitation had a sound when it fell upon the innocent. It sounded like a door closing softly from the outside. "Miss Vale will withdraw to her room under Lady Maud's protection until morning," he said. The words were proper. They were careful. They were not cruel. That made them worse. A cruel order could be resisted cleanly. A careful one asked her to appreciate its gentleness while accepting its wound. Under protection, Honoria repeated. "Yes. Am I accused, Your Grace?" His eyes held hers. "You are not condemned." The room listened. Lady Seraphina listened most of all. Honoria inclined her head with the grace her mother had taught her for bishops, debt collectors, and people determined to mistake silence for surrender. "That is not what I asked." Lady Maud made a faint sound, as if the words had struck her heart. The Duke's hand closed around the folded paper. "There are matters I must examine before I answer. Then I shall not make your examination more difficult by remaining at table." She turned to Lady Maud. "My lady, I am ready." Lady Maud rose with effort before any servant could move to assist her. "I will go with her." Davin gave a satisfied little bow. Seraphina lowered her eyes, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. The room did not erupt. Polite society rarely did. It merely watched a woman walk out beneath suspicion and told itself the silence was mercy. Honoria crossed the dining room with Lady Maud beside her and felt the distance lengthen with every step. At the doorway, she passed Martha, who was trembling so violently that the ribbons of her cap shook. Honoria paused. "Martha." The maid looked up, terrified. "Miss? If you have been frightened into saying what is not true, remember that frightened people may still choose the next truth." Martha began to cry without making a sound. Mrs. Bell took her by the arm and led her away. Behind Honoria, Seraphina's voice floated softly. "How generous Miss Vale remains. It's almost saintly." Honoria did not turn. Saints, she thought, were usually safest after they were dead. Lady Maud said nothing until they reached the east corridor. The lamps had been lit, and the windows were black with evening. "My dear," she said at last, "Alistair is trying to contain the harm." "Yes. That does not mean he believes you guilty." "No. It means he does not believe me innocent quickly enough." Lady Maud stopped. Her lined face tightened, and for once she looked not formidable, but tired. "You are right." The admission cost her something. Honoria wished it brought comfort. It did not. In her small room, the fire had been lit, perhaps by Annie, perhaps by another maid instructed to be kind without being seen. Honoria removed her black glove slowly. The room smelled faintly of lavender, coal smoke, and the starch of clean linen. Lady Maud closed the door, then held out her hand. "May I see the paper he was given, if you know its nature?" "I do not have it," Honoria said. "But I saw enough." The writing was in a feminine hand, or made to resemble one. His Grace looked at me as though the paper had taught him to doubt what he had seen with his own eyes. Davonwick would not dare forge something clumsy. No. Lady Seraphina would not permit clumsiness. Honoria crossed to her little writing table. The torn doeskin glove lay beside her work bag, it seemed half mended from the previous night. She picked it up, then stopped. Beneath the glove lay the scrap of blotting paper she had used after copying Lady Maud's correspondence. A faint mark showed along one edge. Violet. Not black. Not brown. Violet ink, the peculiar shade she had noticed in Lady Seraphina's ivory escritoire when the correspondence book had opened 2 mornings ago. Honoria touched the mark with one fingertip. It had dried in a thin crescent, as if a hurried page had been placed against it before the ink settled. Lady Maud came closer. "What is it?" "The note." Honoria's voice was calm now. Too calm. "If it claims I wrote to Mr. Pike, then it was not written with my ink." "You are certain?" Honoria opened her small travelling desk and lifted out her single bottle. "Mine is plain black, bought in Bath at 6pence less than the better kind. It fades brown at the edge. Lady Seraphina uses violet ink. I saw it in her correspondence book." Lady Maud's eye sharpened. "Can you prove that?" "Not yet." Honoria looked at the glove in her hand. "But I can begin." She set the torn glove on the table, then placed beside it the blotting paper, the black ink bottle, and the folded allowance Lady Maud had advanced her for incidental expenses. "What are you doing?" Lady Maud asked. "Preparing to leave this room with more dignity than I entered it. Alistair asked you to remain until morning. His Grace asked me to remain because he does not yet understand that stillness can be used against a woman as easily as scandal." Honoria drew a clean sheet of paper toward her and dipped her pen into the black ink. Her hand did not shake. "I will not run. I will not hide. But I will not wait here for Lady Seraphina to finish writing my guilt in violet." She began a letter addressed to Mr. Edwin Pike, care of the village inn, requesting a respectable meeting at the parish rectory in the presence of Lady Maud Fenwick. Each word steadied her. Each line returned a little of herself. Outside her door, footsteps passed and faded. Somewhere below, the Duke was choosing procedure, reputation, and delay. Honoria let the ink dry, then placed the torn glove atop the page like a seal no one could counterfeit. By morning, she would choose truth. Morning came to Barrow-mere Park with a thin grey light and the careful quiet of a house that had spent the night listening at keyholes. Honoria had slept little. She had not wept at all. There were mornings when grief made noise, and there were mornings when it became a set of precise tasks. She washed, pinned her hair, dressed in the same grey gown, and placed each object upon the writing table as if preparing an inventory of herself. The folded allowance Lady Maud had advanced lay untouched beside the room key. The letter to Mr. Edwin Pike had dried in her own plain black ink. The torn doeskin glove rested on top of it, its split seam visible in the pale dawn. Honoria looked at the glove for one breath longer than necessary, then put it into her reticule. She would not hide the evidence of what Barrow-mere had done to her simply because it made others uncomfortable. At 7:30, Lady Maud entered without waiting for a formal answer. She wore a dark morning gown and the expression of a woman ready to quarrel with the entire kingdom before breakfast. "You look disgustingly composed," she said. "I am not composed, my lady. I am arranged." "An excellent distinction. Are you determined?" "Yes." "Good. Determination is easier to escort than despair." Honoria picked up the folded allowance and the key. "These belong to you." Lady Maud looked at them and did not reach out. "You are not dismissed." "No. I am returning what might be used to say I stayed for comfort." "My dear child, comfort is hardly what we have offered you. That is why I can return it without regret." Lady Maud's face softened in spite of herself. Alastair will not like this. His Grace may dislike many things today. I cannot make his ease my first duty. No, Lady Maud said quietly. You cannot. They left the east corridor together before the main guests had finished their chocolate. Honoria did not creep down the servants' stair. She walked through the family passage with Lady Maud beside her and Mr. Cresswell ahead to open doors. At the foot of the staircase, Annie stood with a linen basket pressed to her waist, her eyes large and frightened. Honoria paused only long enough to say, "Keep your head high." Annie swallowed and whispered, "Yes, miss." The words were nothing. They were everything. In the entrance hall, the Duke appeared from the direction of his study, still in yesterday evening's severity, though the night had carved shadows beneath his eyes. He stopped when he saw the cloak over Honoria's arm and Lady Maud beside her. His gaze moved to the key and the folded notes in Honoria's hand. "Miss Vale." "Your Grace." "Where are you going?" "To the parish rectory." "For what purpose?" His voice remained controlled, but something in it had lost sleep. Honoria would not let that soften the wound he had made. To meet Mr. Pike in a respectable room, with Lady Maud present, and to ask questions that should have been asked before I was sent upstairs. The silence after that had edges. Mr. Cresswell lowered his eyes. Lady Maud lifted her chin. The Duke looked at Honoria as though she had placed a mirror before him and refused to let him turn away. "I did not send you away as punishment," he said. "No, Your Grace. You sent me away as uncertainty." He flinched slightly. It was so small that no one else might have seen it. Honoria saw it because she had once mistaken his stillness for indifference and had learned better too late to be spared by it. "I intended to protect you from the room," he said. "Protection that requires my silence may be useful to the room." She put the key on the hall table. "It is not always useful to me." Lady Maud's cane struck the marble once. "We must go if we are to reach the rectory before Pike decides this house eats solicitors whole." The Duke stepped aside. He did not command. He did not apologize. Not yet. But as Honoria passed, he said in a low voice, "You will not go unguarded." She looked back. "I will go unwitnessed by scandal." "That is different." His eyes held hers. "Then I will follow at a distance." "As you wish, Your Grace. But do not mistake distance for trust." She left him standing beneath the portraits of his ancestors, and for the first time since she had entered Barrow-mere Park, the front door opened before her without making her feel like a supplicant. The parish rectory stood less than 2 miles from the estate, a square, ivy-edged house beside a modest churchyard where old stones leaned beneath the weight of weather and memory. Lady Maud's carriage took the road slowly, out of respect for both propriety and her bones, as she put it. Honoria watched the hedgerows pass and kept one hand on the reticule in her lap. Behind them, far enough to be proper and near enough to be known, rode one of the Duke's grooms. She suspected the Duke himself was not far beyond the bend, and the knowledge unsettled her more than she wished. The rector's wife received them in a parlour that smelled of beeswax, coal smoke, and dried lavender. Mr. Edwin Pike rose when they entered. He was a narrow man with silver spectacles, a worn black coat, and the grave manner of someone who preferred documents because they did not pretend to be charming. He bowed first to Lady Maud, then to Honoria with equal seriousness. That equal seriousness steadied her. "Miss Vale," he said. "Your letter reached me at the inn shortly after dawn. I admit, I did not expect to find you at the centre of this matter." "Neither did I, Mr. Pike. That has not prevented others from placing me there." His mouth tightened. "So I gather." Lady Maud lowered herself into a chair. "Speak plainly." "I am too old to be teased by paper." Pike opened his leather case and withdrew 3 folded documents tied with blue tape. "The Earl of Davonwick has represented to His Grace that Lady Seraphina's marriage portion is secured against lands free of debt. That representation is false. 2 properties named in the proposed settlement are already burdened. A third does not stand in the Earl's control in the manner claimed. There are also private notes due within the month." Lady Maud's face went very still. Honoria felt the room shrink around the sound of the clock on the mantel. "And Lady Seraphina knows?" Honoria asked. Pike hesitated. I cannot speak to what a lady knows in her conscience. I can speak to correspondence. Her hand appears in several replies concerning the timing of the announcement and the need to prevent delay. He drew out another paper. This copy is in violet ink. Honoria's breath left her quietly. May I see it? He placed it before her. The slant was elegant. The ink was the same peculiar violet she had seen in Seraphina's escritoire, the same shade that had marked the blotting paper in her room. At the bottom, beneath a formal phrase about settlement language, someone had written, after announcement, His Grace cannot retreat without disgrace. Honoria read the line once. Then again. There were sentences that did not raise their voices because they had never needed to. There is more, Pike said. A note was delivered to the Duke last night, implying you had written to me with threats regarding the Lorne family. I did not receive such a letter from you. The hand was an imitation, and not an especially patient one. Honoria opened her reticule and removed her own letter, the black ink plain and severe against the page. This is my hand. Pike compared them. Not the same. Lady Maud leaned forward. Can you say that before witnesses? I can say what is true. Good, Lady Maud said. Truth has been unfashionably absent from Barrow-mere. Pike gathered the copies and slid one set toward Honoria. Keep these with Lady Maud. Do not keep them alone. Honoria accepted them. The papers felt heavier than their weight. She had not come to defeat Lady Seraphina. She had come to recover the simple right not to be used as a convenient stain. Yet the truth now in her hands could crack an engagement that half of Hampshire believed already settled. Outside the parlour window, a movement flashed near the garden gate. Honoria turned in time to see Martha, Lady Seraphina's maid, stepping back behind the yew hedge. Her face was pale. Her eyes dropped to the documents in Honoria's hand. Then she ran. Lady Maud swore softly into her gloves. Pike closed his case. Honoria stood, the papers held against her breast. She will warn Lady Seraphina. Yes, Lady Maud said. Then we must return before the lie arrives ahead of us. Honoria looked toward the churchyard path, where the Duke's dark horse had appeared beyond the lich gate. He had followed, as promised, but had not entered. For once, he was waiting outside the room where her truth was being spoken. Honoria lifted her chin and walked toward the door. She had left Barrow-mere under suspicion. She would return with evidence. More than that, she would return by choice. The churchyard path lay between Honoria and the Duke like a question neither of them could pass without answering. He stood beyond the lich gate, one hand resting on the neck of his dark horse, his hat held at his side despite the damp morning air. The restraint of that posture might once have impressed her. Now it only made her aware of how much discipline a man could possess and still fail at the moment a woman needed belief. Lady Maud emerged from the rectory behind Honoria with Mr. Pike at her elbow, the solicitor's leather case clasped beneath one arm. I require 10 minutes with the rector's wife and a cup of tea strong enough to revive the dead, Lady Maud announced, looking directly at her nephew. You may speak to Miss Vale in the garden where the windows can see you and propriety may stop clutching its pearls. The Duke bowed to his aunt. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She has better cause to scold you than I have, and mine is considerable. Mr. Pike removed his spectacles, polished them once, and wisely retreated into the rectory. Honoria walked toward the small garden beside the churchyard, where lavender had not yet bloomed and the gravel path curved beneath bare lilac branches. Lady Maud remained inside the parlour window in plain view, her cane across her knees like a weapon. The Duke followed at a proper distance. For several steps, he said nothing. Honoria was glad of it. Apologies offered too quickly often had more fear of consequence than understanding of injury. At last he stopped beside the low stone wall. Miss Vale, I owe you an apology. Yes, Your Grace. His face tightened, but he did not look away. I chose order when I should have chosen trust. You chose the room. The words came quietly. They landed harder for that. The room was loud, influential, and comfortable with doubting me. You gave it time to become certain. He lowered his eyes for a moment. I told myself I was preventing gossip. I know. That does not excuse it. No, our rook cried from the church roof, harsh against the grey sky. Honoria held Pike's copied documents beneath her folded shawl. She could feel the edge of the papers against her ribs, as firm as a second spine. The Duke looked at them, then at her face. "Mr. Pike has shown you the settlement correspondence." "He has." "And the forged note?" "He told me enough. It was meant to make me look as if I had written to him in secret. I should not have let Davonwick place it between my judgment and what I already knew." "No, Your Grace. You should not have." He accepted that, and the acceptance mattered more than any graceful defense would have done. "When I saw the note, I knew something was wrong. The hand was not yours. The argument was too convenient. The timing was too precise. Yet I paused." Honoria looked at him then. That pause was the part everyone saw. "I know." His voice lowered. "I have spent my life believing that if I could keep a scandal contained, I could keep people safe. Last night I contained the wrong thing." "You contained me." He closed his eyes once, briefly. "Yes." Silence followed. It was not empty. It held the hothouse, the bracelet, the dining room, the room key left on the hall table, and every small insult that had been dressed as arrangement. Honoria had expected his apology to satisfy some injured part of her. It did not. It only opened the wound cleanly enough for truth to enter. "I am not asking you to like me today," he said. "I am asking what you require." "Require?" "To make this right." She almost smiled, but it would have been too bitter. "That is a very ducal question. It is the only kind I know how to ask quickly." "Then learn a slower one." He looked at her as if the answer had struck and instructed him at once. Honoria drew the documents from beneath her shawl. "I require that I speak." His eyes sharpened. "Before whom?" "Before the people who heard me accused. Before Lady Seraphina. Before Lord Davonwick. Before Mrs. Bell, Mr. Hart, and Mr. Pike. Before Lady Maud. Not as your charity. Not as your rescued dependent. As the person they tried to use. That room will be cruel. It has already been cruel. Seraphina will try to turn it. Then let her try." He studied her with an intensity that no longer felt like suspicion. It felt like a man learning the difference between courage and silence. "If I stand beside you," he said, "some will say I have chosen a side before hearing all proof. You have chosen sides all week, Your Grace. First by doubting me. Then by protecting the process. Now you may choose whether truth needs your permission to be heard." His jaw worked once. "It does not." "Good." She held out the papers. He did not take them immediately. That surprised her. "They are yours to keep with Lady Maud until the room gathers," he said. "If I take them now, I become the voice. You asked to speak." It was the first answer that touched the bruise without pressing it. Honoria lowered the papers slowly. "Then you understand." "I am beginning to." "Beginning is not the same as deserving trust." "No. But it's better than pretending I already have it." Inside the rectory window, Lady Maud lifted her teacup as though toasting the one sensible sentence her nephew had managed. Honoria saw it and looked away before warmth could betray her. "There is more," she said. "The glove, the hothouse lock, the green wax, the camellia oil on the bracelet, the forged note, the violet ink, and Pike's papers. They must all be placed together. Separately, each can be dismissed. Together, they tell the truth. I have the wax and the torn strip from the glove in my study." "You kept them?" "Yes." The simple word moved something in her she did not wish moved. "Why?" He looked toward the churchyard stones, then back at her. "Because when I picked up that piece of leather, I understood it had been asked to carry more than it should." "So had you?" Honoria tightened her fingers around the documents. "Do not make poetry of my injury, Your Grace." "I will not." "Make use of it honestly." "I will." He said it like a vow, but not the romantic kind. The useful kind. The kind that required witnesses, consequences, and less pride than he had shown so far. The rectory door opened, and Mr. Pike stepped out with Lady Maud behind him. My lady, the solicitor said, if this matter is to be addressed today, I recommend doing so before Rumour leaves the estate by luncheon. Rumour has better horses than most gentlemen, Lady Maud replied. Alastair, send your notes. The Duke turned to the groom waiting beyond the gate. Ride to Barrow-mere. Tell Mr. Hart to gather Mrs. Bell, Martha if she can be found, and the key records for the hothouse. The core guests are to remain in the house. Lord Davenwick and Lady Seraphina are to be informed that I request their presence in the drawing-room at noon. The groom mounted and rode at once. Honoria watched the horse disappear down the lane. The decision had been made. Not whispered. Not delayed. Made. Yet speed did not erase last night. She would not let it. The Duke seemed to know that. When we return, he said, Seraphina may accuse you of impropriety for meeting Pike and for speaking with me here. She already sent Martha to watch the rectory. That accusation is likely halfway back to the house. Then I will answer it. No, Honoria's voice stopped him. I will answer it. Lady Maud accompanied me. The rector's wife received me. You waited outside until propriety permitted speech. If Lady Seraphina wishes to make innocent sound improper, she may do so in a room full of witnesses. For the first time that morning, something like admiration broke through the Duke's exhaustion. You are not afraid of her. Honoria looked toward the road to Barrow-mere Park, where the house waited with its polished floors, its listening doors, and its future Duchess sharpening shame into a weapon. I am afraid, she said. I am simply finished letting fear choose my chair. Lady Maud smiled then, not kindly, but fiercely. Excellent. Let us go rearrange the furniture. When the carriage returned along the lane, the Duke did not offer his hand to help Honoria inside until Lady Maud had taken her place and the rector's wife stood at the door. Even then, he waited for Honoria's consent. She placed her gloved hand in his for only the time required. His grip was steady. Hers was steadier. By the time Barrow-mere Park came into view, noon had begun to gather in the clouds above it. The house looked unchanged from the outside. That, Honoria thought, was how power survived so long. It kept its windows bright while the rooms within rearranged the truth. At the front steps, Mr. Hart waited with a grave face. Your Grace, Lady Seraphina has asked that Miss Vale not be admitted through the main hall. The Duke looked at Honoria, then at the open doors. Miss Vale will enter where she was accused. Honoria stepped down from the carriage, the documents held close, the torn glove hidden in her reticule, and every eye at the windows waiting. This time, she did not enter Barrow-mere Park to last. She entered to be heard. The main hall of Barrow-mere Park received Honoria as if it had been instructed not to remember the night before. Sun fell through the high windows onto the marble floor. The portraits watched from their gilt frames with the same proud indifference. A footman held the door, another took Lady Maud's cloak, and somewhere beyond the staircase a whisper stopped too quickly. Honoria stepped inside with Pike's documents beneath one arm and the torn doeskin glove in her reticule. No one blocked her path. No one welcomed her either. That suited her. Welcome could be withdrawn. A straight road to the truth was more useful. The Duke entered behind her, not ahead, and that small restraint steadied something she had not known was trembling. Mr. Hart waited near the blue drawing-room doors. They are assembled, Your Grace. His voice was formal, but his eyes moved to Honoria with grave respect. Lady Seraphina objected to the housekeeper's presence. Lady Seraphina may continue to object from inside the room, the Duke said. Mrs. Bell remains. Honoria looked at him once. He did not explain, did not soften the decision, did not turn it into a favor. He opened the drawing-room doors and let her enter before him. The room had been arranged with care, though not for comfort. Lady Seraphina sat near the fireplace in pale lavender silk, her face composed into injured dignity. Earl Davenwick stood behind her chair, one hand resting on its carved back as if he could lend authority to Fossard by touching furniture. Lady Maud took the chair nearest the window. Mr. Pike stood beside a small writing table with his leather case closed. Mrs. Bell and Mr. Hart remained near the side wall, not among the family, but not hidden. Martha stood behind the housekeeper, white-faced and twisting her apron until Mrs. Bell quietly stilled her hands. 3 guests who had heard the accusation at supper had also been kept as witnesses. Lord Meryton looked bewildered. Mrs. Anstruther looked thrilled and horrified in equal measure. Lady Rothbury held a handkerchief she did not need. Honoria felt every gaze settle on her. Last night those gazes had weighed guilt upon her before proof could breathe. Today they waited for her to carry proof uphill. The Duke remained near the door. That mattered. He was in the room, but not at the center of her voice. Lady Seraphina lifted her chin. Must this continue? Miss Vale has already endured embarrassment enough. I'm sure we all wish to spare her. Honoria set the papers on the table. I thank you for the wish, my lady. I would prefer accuracy. The Earl made a derisive sound. Accuracy from a companion accused of theft. Lady Maud's cane struck the floor. The Duke's voice followed, cool and exact. Miss Vale will be heard in my house. 6 words. They did not rescue her. They opened the room. Honoria drew a breath and began before anyone could reclaim it. Last evening, Lady Seraphina's bracelet was said to have been found in my trunk. Before that, I had been sent to the hothouse alone and locked inside. Before that, I found a calling card belonging to Mr. Edwin Pike hidden in Lady Seraphina's correspondence book. Before that, His Grace received signs that the engagement settlement had been misrepresented. Seraphina laughed softly. What a remarkable chain of little accidents. I'm afraid Miss Vale has turned a misplaced bracelet into a novel. No, Honoria said. Only into a sequence. She removed the torn doeskin glove from her reticule and laid it on the table. The split seam opened beneath the light. The room looked at it as if ruined leather had acquired a voice. This tore when I tried to free the hothouse latch. His Grace found me there. He also found green wax on the outer lock. The Duke stepped forward just far enough to place a folded paper beside the glove. Inside lay the tiny flake of wax. Then he stepped back. Mr. Hart, Honoria continued, will you say whether the hothouse service door can be locked from within? The steward bowed. It cannot, Miss Vale. The outer bolt must be set from the garden side. And Mrs. Bell, did you instruct Martha to search my room or trunk last night? Mrs. Bell's expression hardened. I did not. No servant in my charge has leave to search a gentlewoman's private trunk without direct order and witnesses. Martha gave a small sob. Seraphina turned her head with beautiful sorrow. Martha was distressed. She wished to help. Must we frighten servants now? No one here should be frightened into carrying another person's lie, Honoria said. Her eyes moved to Martha, not harshly. Martha, when you found the bracelet, was my trunk open already? Martha shook her head, then stopped when the Earl's breath hissed behind Seraphina's chair. The Duke's gaze shifted to him. No more. Only that. Martha swallowed. It was not open, miss. Who gave you the key? The room went utterly still. Martha looked at Seraphina, and all the colour left her face. My lady said there might be a spare in the housekeeper's ring, but I could not take that. Then she gave me a small key from her workbox. She said it would open most old locks. Seraphina rose. That is a filthy invention. Martha, don't be absurd. She's not lying, Martha whispered. I put it there because you told me I would be sent off without a character if I refused. Mrs. Bell put one steady hand on the girl's shoulder. The Earl stepped forward. This is intolerable. Calder-mere, you allow servants and dependents to slander a lady of birth under your roof. Honoria turned to him. A lady of birth does not become truthful by outranking the people she harms. His face darkened. You will remember to whom you speak. The Duke's answer came at once. And you will remember where you stand. The Earl stopped. The room seemed to feel, all at once, the hierarchy it had tried to use against Honoria. A duke was not an earl to be managed by bluster. Seraphina saw it too. Her fingers closed around the back of her chair. Honoria lifted Pike's documents. Mr. Pike, would you confirm why you came to Barrow-mere Park? The solicitor opened his case with unhurried precision. I came because the proposed marriage settlement contained representations that could not be honored. Lands described as free are burdened. Portions described as secured are not secure. I wrote to His Grace warning that the announcement should not proceed before the matter was clarified. Lady Rothbury made a faint sound behind her handkerchief. Lord Meryton muttered, "Good heavens." Pike placed another page on the table. "I can also confirm that a note presented last night as evidence against Miss Vale was not a letter I received from her. Her handwriting, shown to me this morning, is distinct. The false note was written in violet ink." Honoria opened the blotting paper she had brought from her room and laid it beside her own bottle of plain black ink. "This mark was left in my room after the forged note had been placed among my things. It is not from my bottle." The Duke looked at Seraphina. "Your escritoire contains violet ink." "Half the women in England use coloured ink," Seraphina said. "It's hardly a crime to have taste." "No," Honoria said. "But it is a pattern when placed beside wax, a locked hothouse, a planted bracelet, and a maid threatened into silence." Seraphina's gaze snapped toward her. The mask remained, but it had begun to crack around the eyes. "You have been very busy for a woman who claimed to be innocent. Innocence is not idleness." Lady Maud smiled grimly. "Put that on the family crest." Davenwick tried once more. "All this proves is confusion. A nervous maid. A companion eager to rise above her station. A solicitor meddling in settlements he misunderstands. My daughter is being sacrificed to a house's sudden affection for a poor relation." "I am not a poor relation," Honoria said. "I am Miss Honoria Vale. My father was a clergyman. My mother was a gentleman's daughter. I came here to serve Lady Maud honourably for 1 week. Your daughter tried to make that service look like theft because it suited her to have someone lower blamed before Mr. Pike arrived." The words did not tremble. That was their force. Even Mrs. Anstruther stopped breathing behind her handkerchief. The Duke watched Honoria with something in his face she could not afford to read yet. Regret, yes. Admiration, perhaps. But he kept silent because he had promised her the room. Seraphina noticed his silence and mistook it for weakness. Her chin lifted. Very moving. Truly. But even if every word were true, what then? You would still be a companion with one mended gown and a torn glove. I would still be Lady Seraphina Lorne. His Grace still needs a duchess, not a sermon in grey wool. Her smile returned, bright and cruel enough at last to show its teeth. She will never be duchess. For one moment after Lady Seraphina's words, no one in the drawing-room breathed as if the house itself had forgotten how. The insult had crossed a line no cleverness could redraw. It was not merely pride speaking now. It was contempt stripped of silk, contempt so sure of rank that it no longer bothered to disguise itself as injury. Honoria stood beside the small writing table with the torn glove, the wax, the letters, and the documents spread before her like humble witnesses. The room had been listening to evidence. Now it had heard motive. Lady Maud's face went white with anger. Martha began to weep openly against Mrs. Bell's shoulder. Mr. Pike lowered his eyes as if giving the words the dignity of official memory. The Duke of Calder-mere did not move at once. That stillness might once have frightened Honoria. Now she understood it differently. He was no longer weighing her. He was weighing the ruin of his own blindness. Lady Seraphina seemed to mistake the silence for permission and lifted her chin higher. You may all stare as though I've said something monstrous, but someone must speak plainly. Houses like this are not governed by sentiment. They are governed by suitability. Miss Vale has served a purpose. She has entertained Aunt Maud, exposed a few inconvenient papers, and made herself memorable. But she can't be made into what she isn't. Honoria felt the words strike, but they did not enter as they might have 5 days ago. Something in her had changed. Or perhaps something had been returned. She looked down at the torn glove. It lay open, old and damaged and stubbornly present. Then she looked back at Seraphina. You are right in one respect, my lady. I cannot be made into what I am not. Seraphina smiled. At last, we agree. I am not a thief. I am not a liar. I am not a servant to your ambition. I am not a convenient shame to be locked away when your father's debts come calling. The smile vanished. Honoria's voice remained even. And I am not required to become Duchess of Calder-mere in order to be treated as a gentlewoman. The room went utterly still again, but this silence had changed sides. Lady Rothbury lowered her handkerchief. Lord Meryton sat straighter. Mrs. Anstruther looked as if she had finally understood that she was witnessing not gossip, but judgment. The Duke stepped forward then. He did not come between Honoria and the room. He came to stand beside the table, close enough that everyone could see his choice and far enough that her voice remained her own. Miss Vale is correct, he said. Her worth has never depended upon my title. Seraphina turned toward him, alarm breaking through at last. Alistair, don't be theatrical. I have been insufficiently theatrical, perhaps. A plain statement may serve better. He reached into his coat and withdrew the folded paper that had carried the forged accusation the night before. This note was placed before me as if it were evidence against Miss Vale. I allowed it to delay my trust. That was my failure. Honoria looked at him then. He did not look away. The note was convenient, he continued. So convenient that I should have rejected it sooner. Instead, I permitted uncertainty to fall upon the person in this house least able to bear the cost of it. Lady Seraphina, you used my first judgment of Miss Vale as permission to injure her further. Lord Davenwick, you relied upon my concern for reputation to keep me manageable. Both of you miscalculated. The Earl stepped forward, scarlet now. Calder-mere, consider what you are doing. Before witnesses, before servants, before ladies who will carry this beyond your gates, you are choosing the word of a paid companion over the daughter of an earl. No, the Duke said. I am choosing proof over rank. The phrase struck the room like a door opened to cold air. Davenwick stared at him. You would disgrace my daughter. Your daughter has disgraced herself. Seraphina's hand flew to the back of her chair. How dare you? With more patience than you deserve. He turned to Mr. Pike. You will proceed through the proper channels regarding the settlement representations. Pike bowed. Yes, Your Grace. Copies will be sent to my solicitor in London before nightfall. No announcement will be made. No marriage negotiations will continue. Seraphina looked as though he had spoken in a foreign tongue. You cannot simply end this. I can. I have. After everything promised. Promises built upon deceit do not bind honor. They insult it. Her gaze flashed to Honoria with sudden hatred. Because of her? The Duke's answer came without hesitation. Because of you. The simplicity of it silenced even Lady Maud. Seraphina drew herself upright, grasping for the last weapon left to her. Then let every woman in England hear that the Duke of Calder-mere cast off Lady Seraphina Lawn for a grey-gowned companion with a torn glove. See what your fine society does with that. It will hear the truth from me first, the Duke said. It will hear that Miss Vale was wrongfully accused under my roof, that her conduct was honourable, that her courage exposed a fraud which I should have seen sooner, and that any household receiving gossip against her receives a falsehood. Honoria's breath caught despite herself. Not because he defended her. Because he named his own failure in the same sentence as her honor. That was rarer than protection. It was accountability. Davenwick spoke through his teeth. You will regret making an enemy of me. Lady Maud laughed then, a short and merciless sound. My dear Davenwick, you have mistaken debt for power for too many years. It has made you careless. The Earl looked at the guests and found no rescue there. Lady Rothbury had turned away from him. Lord Meryton appeared fascinated by the carpet. Mrs. Anstruther, who had arrived eager for gossip, now sat with the rigid posture of someone realizing gossip could stain the teller. The Duke pulled the bell. When Mr. Cresswell entered, he bowed with flawless calm. Lord Davenwick's carriage is to be brought around. Lady Seraphina's maid will pack under Mrs. Bell's supervision. They will depart within the hour. Seraphina's face changed then. Not softened. Not humbled. Stripped. For a moment, Honoria saw the frightened calculation beneath the beauty, the terror of a woman who had believed a ducal crown would save her from every consequence. Alistair, she said, quieter now, don't do this. You know what people will say. Yes, he said. For once, they may say something accurate. Martha gave a small broken sound, and Mrs. Bell tightened her hold on the girl's shoulder. Honoria looked at the maid. Martha should not be sent away without a character. The room turned to her in surprise. Even Seraphina stared. Honoria kept her eyes on the Duke. She was wrong, but she was threatened. That does not make her innocent. It does make her salvageable. The Duke inclined his head. Mrs. Bell will decide her place after a fair inquiry. No one will be dismissed today to satisfy another person's convenience. Mrs. Bell's face softened with grave approval. It was a small justice, but small justice mattered most to people who had never been offered large ones. Seraphina saw it too, and perhaps that angered her more than the broken engagement. She had wanted Honoria humiliated. Instead, Honoria had asked mercy for someone beneath her. There was no answer to that which did not make cruelty uglier. The Earl offered his arm to his daughter. She did not take it at first. Her gaze remained on the torn glove on the table, as if she could not believe so poor an object had outlived her. Then she turned and walked toward the door, her silk whispering over the carpet with all the dignity she could still afford. At the threshold, she looked back once. This house will be lonely with only virtue to decorate it. Lady Maud replied, better virtue than insolvency. The door closed behind them. No one laughed. The sound of departure moved through Barrow-mere Park by degrees, footsteps in the hall, a trunk brought down, carriage wheels summoned over gravel, a muffled command from the courtyard. In the drawing-room, the silence that remained was not comfortable, but it was clean. The Duke looked at the guests who had witnessed the accusation and the reversal. You came here expecting an announcement. You have received one. Miss Honoria Vale was wronged in this house. She remained truthful when truth cost her safety. She will be treated accordingly by every person under my roof. Lady Rothbury rose first and curtsied to Honoria. Not deeply, but enough. Miss Vale. Lord Meryton followed with an awkward bow. Mrs. Anstruther murmured something that sounded like apology and astonishment sharing one breath. Honoria accepted each with composure because public validation, like public shame, had to be survived. When the guests withdrew under Lady Maud's sharp direction, only Honoria and the Duke remained near the table. The torn glove lay between them. He looked at it, then at her. I said once that you would not last. Honoria did not help him. He deserved the difficulty of the sentence. I measured the wrong thing, he said. I measured softness where I should have looked for strength. I measured your poverty and called it fragility. I measured the weak and failed to see that my engagement had less honor in it than your silence. Her throat tightened, but her voice stayed steady. What do you ask of me, Your Grace? Not forgiveness today. Not gratitude. Not an answer shaped by exhaustion. He took one careful step back, giving her space in the very room where space had been denied. Only the honor of earning the week I wasted. Outside, the Davonwick carriage began to roll down the drive. Honoria heard it pass beneath the windows, carrying away ivory silk, false pearls, and a future that had nearly purchased her disgrace. She looked at the torn glove, then at the Duke. I will remain until the week ends, she said. Not because I have nowhere to go. No, his voice was soft. Because I no longer fear this house. The word settled between them like the first honest thing Barrow-mere Park had offered her. Then Honoria gathered the glove, folded it once, and placed it back in her reticule. The week was not over. But the lie had been broken. 3 weeks later, Barrow-mere Park no longer sounded like a house holding its breath. The bell still rang, the servants still moved with quiet precision, and the portraits still looked down from their gilt frames with the patient arrogance of the dead, but something in the air had altered. It was not softness. A ducal house did not become soft because one lie had been broken. It became more honest in the places where honesty had been paid for. The blue drawing-room had been stripped of white roses. No camellias stood before the mirror. Lady Seraphina's chair had been removed from the place she had chosen for herself, and no one spoke of it unless Lady Maud wished to sharpen a morning with memory. The Earl of Davonwick and his daughter had returned to London under the kind of silence that announces disgrace more clearly than shouting. Invitations had begun disappearing from their hall table. A dinner in Mayfair had been postponed. A musical had lost its hostess's enthusiasm. Mr. Pike had written to the Duke's solicitor, and proper channels, once stirred by a Duke, had begun moving with slow and merciless dignity. Nothing vulgar had been printed. Nothing needed to be. Among the upper rooms of England, truth travelled best when sealed inside private letters. Honoria heard these reports because Lady Maud told them to her over breakfast with the satisfaction of a general reading dispatches. Lady Rothbury has remembered a prior engagement whenever Lady Seraphina's name is mentioned, Lady Maud said one morning, cutting toast with unnecessary force. Remarkable woman. Her memory improves near scandal. Honoria poured tea. I hope Lady Seraphina is not entirely without friends. My dear, a consequence is not the same as exile. She has rooms, relations, gowns, and more chances than she ever offered you. Honoria accepted that. Mercy did not require pretending harm had been small. Martha had not been dismissed without a character. Mrs. Bell had put her under strict watch in the laundry for a month, where she might learn steadiness away from Lady Seraphina's influence. Annie had been promoted to assist in the linen room and still blushed whenever Honoria passed. These were small repairs. Honoria had learned to trust small repairs. Large declarations often arrived late and left early. A written term, a saved position, a servant not ruined, a slander corrected before it hardened into reputation, these things endured better. On the last day of Honoria's original week, Lady Maud had placed a folded paper beside her breakfast plate. Do not look as though I am proposing marriage, the old woman said. I have had 2 husbands and survived both. I will not press that fate upon anyone. Honoria opened the paper and found written terms in Lady Maud's bold hand. Companion and correspondence secretary. Salary clearly stated. Half-day free each week when duties allowed. A proper room, not the small chamber near the servants' stair. Letters of reference guaranteed by Lady Maud Fenwick and the Duke of Calder-mere should Honoria choose to leave. My lady, Honoria said, because for a moment she could say nothing else. You may refuse, Lady Maud said. I am old, not charitable. I want a woman who can read a room, write a letter, and stare down fools without raising her voice. You are inconveniently qualified. Honoria touched the edge of the paper. And if I accept? Then you accept because it suits you, not because you have been cornered by need. Honoria looked toward the window, where the lawn shone after rain. She thought of Bath, of unpaid coal, of the landlord's wife trying not to pity her, of her father's books packed away in boxes because wisdom had not paid rent. Then she thought of the drawing room, of her own voice heard at last, of the Duke standing aside so she could use it. I accept, she said. For now. Lady Maud smiled. Excellent. Never give forever to anyone who has not earned the season. The Duke did not press. That, more than any speech, told Honoria that his apology had begun to take root. He sent no jewels. He made no dramatic request. He did not attempt to turn gratitude into attachment before the bruise had faded. Instead, he did the slower, harder things. He wrote to every household represented at the supper, stating in his own hand that Miss Honoria Vale had been falsely accused and had conducted herself with courage and honour. He instructed Mr. Cresswell that all callers asking after Lady Maud were to be told Miss Vale received correspondence in the blue morning room. He placed her chair openly beside his aunt's at breakfast when Lady Maud desired company. He greeted her as a gentlewoman before guests and as a person before silence. Then came the calling card. It arrived on a silver salver, though he lived under the same roof, which made Lady Maud laugh until she coughed. His Grace the Duke of Calder-mere. Beneath the engraved name, in his own hand, he had written, for a walk in the South Garden, if Miss Vale finds the weather and the company tolerable. Honoria held the card and tried not to smile. He is courting you like a man terrified of being improper in his own garden, Lady Maud observed. He is learning, Honoria said. At his age, that is practically heroic. The walk took place with Lady Maud visible from the terrace, wrapped in a shawl and pretending not to supervise. The Duke did not offer his arm until a stretch of damp gravel made it sensible, and even then he waited. Honoria took it for 12 steps. Then the path widened, and she released him. He accepted both gestures without claiming meaning from either. You have had replies to your letters, she asked. Yes. Lady Rothbury's was 9 pages and contained 3 apologies, 2 warnings, and 1 recipe for preserving pears. That seems thorough. Lord Meryton wrote that he had never doubted you. Lord Meryton could not hear half the accusation. He did not mention that. Honoria laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised them both. It was not large. It was not careless. But it belonged to a woman no longer measuring every breath against danger. The Duke looked at her as if the sound had been entrusted to him. "I am glad," he said. "Of Lord Meryton's deafness. Of hearing you laugh." She looked away toward the yew hedge, where new green had begun along the dark branches. "Do not make too much of it, Your Grace. I am trying to make only enough." That was the trouble with him now. He had become careful in ways that reached her because they did not demand to. A week later, he asked permission to send a note when he was in London. Honoria gave it. The letter arrived 2 days after he left, and it contained no flattery beyond honesty. He wrote of the solicitor's progress, of Lady Seraphina's increasing social quiet, of a bookseller near Piccadilly who had a volume of sermons by Honoria's father's favourite theologian. He asked whether he might purchase it for Lady Maud's library, where Honoria could consult it without feeling bribed. Honoria read that sentence twice. Then she answered yes. By the time he returned to Barrow-mere, spring had warmed the lawns, and Honoria's new room overlooked the west orchard rather than the kitchen garden. On the small writing table sat her old torn glove, clean but unrepaired, because some evidence did not need mending to be honoured. The Duke came to the blue morning room on a mild afternoon when Lady Maud was asleep in the chair by the window and Honoria was sorting replies from Hampshire neighbours who had suddenly discovered her handwriting admirable. He carried a narrow box tied with brown ribbon. He set it on the table, then stepped back. "May I?" he asked. Honoria looked at the box, then at him. "That depends entirely upon what it is. Not jewels. Not a bribe. Not an apology trying to be decorative. A promising beginning." "Gloves," he said. "Doeskin. Properly made. Yours to refuse." Her throat tightened at the plainness of it. She opened the box. Inside lay a new pair of gloves, soft and pale and finely stitched. Beside them, wrapped in tissue, was the torn one she had thought left on her own table. It had been placed in a smaller paper sleeve, preserved, not hidden. "I asked Annie to fetch it," he said. "With your permission, though through Lady Maud, because I have learned terror of your aunt is the purest form of propriety." Honoria touched the broken seam. "Why return this with the new pair?" His voice softened. "Because I do not want to erase what you survived. I want never to forget what my blindness cost you." Lady Maud opened one eye from her chair. "That is nearly a decent answer, Alastair." "High praise," he said. Honoria smiled then, not because the hurt had vanished, but because it no longer ruled the room. She lifted the new gloves and laid the old one beside them. "I will accept them." The Duke's breath changed. "Only slightly." "Thank you." "And I will accept your next walk." "Only the next." "For now." Lady Maud closed her eye again. "Sensible girl." The Duke looked at Honoria with warmth held carefully inside restraint. "Then I shall endeavour not to waste it." Honoria drew on one new glove. It fit without pinching. She flexed her hand and thought of the first day, the marble hall, the hidden seam, the voice that had judged her before knowing what she had already endured. "We shall see, Your Grace," she said, meeting his eyes. "You once doubted whether I could last a week. Now we shall learn whether you can." He bowed, and there was no arrogance in it. "I intend to try." Later, as evening settled gold across Barrow-mere Park, Honoria walked through the front hall with uncovered hands, carrying the new gloves at her side and the old one folded safely in her desk upstairs. The portraits looked down. The marble shone. The house was still grand, still difficult, still full of echoes. But it no longer seemed to be measuring her by what she lacked. At the foot of the staircase, the Duke came to walk beside her. Not ahead. Not leading. Beside her. And for the first time since her arrival, Honoria did not brace herself against the silence of Barrow-mere Park. She let it hold.